In this segment, I'm going to talk about setting up employer-paid deductions. I know that's somewhat of an oxymoron, employer-paid deductions. They are set up as deductions in the payroll system, although they are not taken out of an employee's paycheck, but that's a convenient place and not a bad method really of setting up other expenses that the company has that are employee related. So to start with that, we're going to go to the payroll system and we're going to go to codes maintenance. Under codes maintenance, we're going to go to the deductions. In the deduction file, you'll see a list of what your present deductions are. Now, if I have an opening number somewhere in the middle, this particular list is sequential, so there isn't an opening there. But let's say that I didn't have a number 6 as a deduction. I wanted to add this one in that place. A little trick that some are not aware of is that if you go to the line below where you want to insert it, and if you hit the insert key, so I'm going to hit the insert key, that opens up a blank line, and then you can insert the deduction in that sequence in that spot. Now in this particular case, I don't have to insert one there. I can use the append, which is going to put it down at the bottom. So this number I'm going to use, it's just a sequential number. I'm going to use 12 because that's my next number. And the description I'm going to use here is for employer paid health. Another example might be, for example, perhaps the company matches a 401k or an IRA or a 403b. So you might have an employer matching deduction of other types as well. You can set up as many of these as you like. The critical part is this employer deduction flag question, and I'm going to put a check in that box. And by doing that, it also activates the accrued deduction account. Now, the liability account I will put in, and that is the account that is going to be credited when I post checks. And incidentally, don't forget the F1 key is your friend. That's the context-sensitive help. And if I hit the F1 key, a little window pops up of help explaining a little bit about that particular line. And here, as it says, this account is credited when you post checks. In a similar way, then, the accrued deduction account, typically I might place this account on my balance sheet in the credit section, and this is the account that is debited when you post checks. So these two accounts come into play with the post checks, and they offset each other. It's you might think of it almost like a holding account, and so the liability account is credited at post checks. This accrued deduction account is debited, and there's a third account that will come into play, and that's going to be defined under each department, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So here I'm going to use 2290 as my accrued deduction account. Deferred compensation, this question, really, this is a confusing question. Its sole purpose really is, do you want this to show up on the W-2? That's really the only purpose of this question in the payroll system. And if you put a check in that box, then this deduction will be evaluated later during the W-2 process to appear in box 12 or box 14 of the W-2. So assuming that this is something reportable on the W-2, I put a check in the deferred comp box. And calculate on gross or net, the only purpose of that is if you define a deduction as being a percentage, it wants to know what is the percent based on. Is it based on the gross pay if you do a deduction as a percent, or is it based on the net pay? And a typical answer would be gross pay. And then I page down and save that. So now I've got my new deduction. It's set as employer paid, and it is flagged as a deferred comp so that it will show up on the W-2s. So that's all there is to setting up the actual deduction. That takes just a second. I would also caution you that you do not want to use the withholding. Some of you are aware of how you flag a deduction as being pre-tax or after tax. You do not want to mess with that in regard to employer paid deductions. Just leave the tax status alone. You don't have to do anything else special with those deductions. They are not treated as taxable money anyway, so you don't want to mess with that. So next I'm going to go to the file maintenance, and I'm going to show where under the employee screen you can set up that deduction for that employee. Now I just want to go to the salary information screen because that's where my deductions are on this version, and I can page down, and here I have my list of deductions, and I can append a deduction, and I can say, okay, I've got my new number now that I've set up, and that's number 12, and I'm going to say YYY. Yes, take it out, and the amount is going to be $125. And I page down, and now I've just set that up for that employee as a deduction. It's as simple as that. So adding the deduction is standard in a standard practice, and you have all the functionality that you would want. You can set up formulas, you can do percentages, things like that. So for example, if I was setting up an employer matching retirement plan, I might do it to match the 401k. Maybe the employer matches a maximum of 2%, so I might put PPP and do 2%. So forth. So that's a standard setup in that regard. The other thing we're going to look at then is how this expense gets handled in the payroll system. So I would caution you that what comes into play then is the employee's home department, and we're going to go into the department file and specify GL accounts. So I would want you to realize that all of the expense for this employee is going to go against the department of their home department. Now, if you use the allocations function, the employee department allocations, it will get allocated in a standard way along with everything else. But without using the employee department allocations, the expense is going to go to the employee's home department. So next I will go to the department. So I've first under codes maintenance, I've set up the deduction. Then under file maintenance, I've added the deduction to the employee's file. Now I'm going down to the departments, and I'm going to call up each of my departments in turn. And when I page down, I get my list of the different earnings codes that are available on that department. And you see this is where the expenses, when you post expense to the general ledger from payroll, this is where the GL accounts come from. What I want to do in this case is I want to do the specify the new deduction as an expense. So I'm going to use the append. And when I do that, it first asks me what type. Well, I'm adding a deduction. And then it asks me, and I hit the enter key. So I choose deduction and I hit the enter key, and it jumps down and it asks me for what account do I want to use. I want to use the employer deduction. And now I get to specify my GL account for this particular department. So I might have a line item in my general ledger where those expenses are going to go for employer paid health insurance, and so I would put that account in. And perhaps that has to do with a sub account based on the department. And I would put the appropriate account in. These particular amount fields are going to be populated when you post the checks. So when you're setting this up, you do not have to put any amounts in there. Those will populate automatically. And then I page down. So now I've got the new account for this department specifying where that employer paid deduction is going to hit the general ledger. So that's very important. Now, incidentally, if you don't set that up under the department and you post the checks, the system will populate that. Some of you may have seen that 55,000 account number, that generic accounts show up. You can always come in here and edit those accounts. So a good time to edit those GL accounts. It's good to be proactive and set them up ahead of time, but you can always intercede and fix them if they end up being wrong. So if you miss that step or forget that step, it just takes a little editing. The key thing is that what you need to know is it's important to go to the departments and set up those GL accounts and or edit them. So now that's all that's required to get the employer paid deduction to function within your system. And I mentioned in going back over how the general ledger is affected by this. Some of you who are not interfaced to a general ledger, some of this general ledger discussion, maybe it's not critical to you, but it's not bad to have it set up in a proper way just from an informational standpoint. Even if you're just getting paper reports, it's nice to have the GL accounts show up appropriately for make the reports more meaningful, even if it's not automatically interfaced. So there's really 3 GL accounts that come into play. 2 of them are specified in the deduction file, and those 2 accounts, the liability account when you post checks is credited, and the accrued deduction account is debited at that moment of posting checks. A few minutes later, when you post the expense to the general ledger, the accrued deduction account is credited and the expense account in the department is debited. So those 3 accounts account for all of the accounting of this employer paid deduction. Now, if you don't want the payroll system to, let's say that you've got a more sophisticated way that you don't allocate it by the employee's home department and that's not a suitable way for you to accept that, you can set these 3 accounts here, these 2 here as well as the department account, set them all to be the same account, and then it'll end up having no effect on your general ledger. And then you can still do the expense allocation in any standard way that you've been doing it in the past. So the system is going to want to use those accounts, so you should put something there, but whether or not you make all 3 places the same account or not is up to you on what you want to accomplish. The final thing I'd like to tie together then is how does this automatically appear on the W-2? Well, there's 3 considerations to have any deduction show up in box 12 on the W-2. And those considerations start with the deduction file again. The 2 things here that you want to look at, 2 of the 3 things are right here. The first thing is this deferred comp box. Again, think of that as if there's a check here, then that's something you want to appear on the W-2. That's really its sole purpose. So I can see that I want the 401k contributions to show up. That happens to be an employee contribution. But now I also want this employer healthcare to show up because I've checked that box. So that's one critical point. The second critical point here is make a note of what the first 4 characters are of the description. Those first 4 characters need to be unique for any deduction that is checked. So in other words, I don't want another deduction that's checked to start with the same 4 characters. Because now we're going to go to a table, and the way the extract of the W-2 data works, it keys in on first, it sees what is checked, and then it checks for the description and tries to match those up. And I'll show you that then. So the final piece of the puzzle is to go to File Maintenance, and we're coming to the tax tables, and there is a clever little table called W-2 Code. The W-2 Code table is used for processing W-2s. Now, the table that I've pulled up happens to be the standard Open Systems table, and Crossover Designs has customized the W-2 process, and this table is not appropriate for the use with your payroll system because of my custom W-2 program. So what I'm going to do is, and the way I can tell it's not is its number of columns are 4. instead of 2. This should be 2 columns, and I'm going to delete this table by hitting the F3 key, and then I'm going to put it in again, and I'm going to put the description is box 12 W2 codes, and the number of columns should be 2, the column length should be 12, and the type should be A. And the 2 columns are going to be the deduction, and then I hit the space bar and I come over and I'm going to say box 12 code. So here I can put in the deduction, it's not case sensitive on the deduction, I just have to match the letters. So for example, the 401k, I want that one to match, and actually I should look that up. I'm going to say that's a D as in dog, I believe. I'll check that. It could be an E. I know there's a 401k and a 403b. I'm going to use 401k and put the letter D. So what this will cause the extract program to do is look for a deduction that starts with 401k, and then it will subtotal those deductions and put them in box 12 with the code D. The employer, EMPL, is how my deduction started, and now I want that to show up in the box, and those are now that's a double D. I'm just looking at my list here, and I see my 401k, in fact, is a D, so I guessed right on that one. The 403b would be an E, and the cost of employer-sponsored health coverage is the double D. So, with that table in place then, and I only have to define in this table the codes that I use. In the sample open systems documentation, you'll see every possible code. You don't have to put in every possible code. You just have to put in the ones that you use. So I page down and I save that table. And incidentally, that table just needs to be correct at the time of W2 time. So if it could be not set up all year long, and then at W2 time you can do it. And in fact, if you do your extract of W2 data and things do not appear in box 12, you can go through that setup that I just explained, fix it, and then run the extract again, and it will bring the amounts in. So that only has to be set up at W2 time. And that's how you can get your employer-paid deductions to not only accumulate informationally for you throughout the year. One final thing I should mention, because some of you will get that set up a little bit late. If I come into File Maintenance and I go to the Employee History part, I can come into the Employee History screen, and I can pull up a employee, and I can just say that I want the deduction history. So I'm unchecking the other options. So I can do the deduction history. And this is where I can come in, and I can, if I've used it once already, it will show up here and I can just edit the amounts. If I have not used it yet, I can do the append, and I can say code 12, and the state you can skip. You can leave that blank, and then I can put an amount in for the appropriate month that I wanted to put in. So perhaps I missed a payroll and I put it in for that. Now, if the months are not appropriate here, it's because of your date. You can use the change quarter option at the bottom of the screen, and so you can change and get it in any month that you wanted to. And so using the file maintenance, when you make a change, it's going to want to do a audit report just to show you what you changed. So using the employee history, you can fix those amounts so that the year-to-date reflects the total amount for the employee. So that's the trick for getting those in there for year-to-date amounts. That should do it.